On Friday, 23rd February 1894, disaster struck in the Beaulieu Firth. The Kessock Ferry sank, killing 6 men. That Friday evening, the boat left the north side of the ferry to come to the south side soon after 6 o'clock. As they set off, their sister boat left the Inverness side and made it safely to the Black Isle. The one coming from the north had to bear the brunt of the poor weather that was setting in. Gusty gales swept in from the south and the southwest. On the southbound ferry there were no passengers and little in the way of goods, so she was light. She made good time heading towards the South Pier. Nothing seemed to be wrong as they approached the jetty. Suddenly, a huge gust of wind caught the vessel, forcing it off course and onto the little bay that lies between the ferry line and the narrow neck that opens up into the Moray Firth and the estuary of the River Ness. The boat was helpless as it tossed on the swell around 300 yards from the bank. The 4 men on board the ferry were not unfamiliar with bad weather at that time of year. They made repeated attempts to get back to the pier, but the gusts were too strong. What made matters worse was the slanting sleet, and the heavy sky began dumping its load. Rather than let the boat be pulled back out into the channel on the gusts, Murdo MacLeod, the 52-year-old skipper, who'd worked the ferry for the past 14 years, decided to drop anchor where they were. This was done, but the men couldn't keep the boat's head to the gusty wind, and she came broadside on the sea. Water poured in. The men tried their best to bail it out as the storm raged all round them. The ferrymen knew they were in trouble and sounded the horn, signalling they needed assistance. 4 members of the local coastguard responded to the call, setting out in a similar flat-bottomed ferry. The reserves were commanded by Mr. Hobbs, the chief officer who stayed at the coastguard station. Along with the 3 coastguards was Andrew Ross of the North Kessock Inn. It was Hobbs's intention to come round by the Vanguard, a pilot cutter that lay ahead of the ferry boat, and attach the relief boat to it. However, the heavy seas carried them past the cutter and the ferry boat, and they failed to attach the hawser to the Vanguard. The coastguards drifted away until they reached the sheltered side of the bank, which divides the little bay from the mouth of the Ness. It was deemed impossible to bring the boat round again against the rough sea, so they proceeded along the shore until they found a smaller boat, to which the hawser was finally attached. The men attempted once more to reach the ferry. Ross was put on the Vanguard with one end of the hawser. The coastguards drifted down by the line to the ferry, and the ferrymen managed to climb aboard the small boat and pull themselves a short distance before the order came to slacken the hawser. Just at that, a large wave struck her. The bow rose on the crest of the wave, and she capsized, due to the stern being low at the time. All 8 men were tossed into the sea, with little chance of saving themselves. Charles Lovejoy, a coastguard boatman, managed to haul himself ashore, and Angus McKinnon, who also fell clear of the upturned boat, clung to her keel until she was carried into shallow water, where he too made it to shore. Ross was rescued from the Vanguard shortly after the disaster. The large ferry boat was still at anchor, and the smaller boat was found stranded upturned on the bank. By this time the news had spread, and a crowd had gathered. The families of the men were devastated. Over the weekend and into the next week, a search for the men was conducted, with smaller boats checking the small bay for bodies, using fishing lines and grappling irons. A linen handkerchief and a piece of serge was found floating in the water, and John Mackenzie's bonnet was found on the beach at Charleston. The men left behind 5 widows and a total of 26 children. The dead from the Coast Guard were William Hobbs, aged 54, the divisional officer; Richard State, aged 40, a commissioned boatman; and James Kilby, 28. The ferrymen lost were Murdo MacLeod, 52, the skipper; John Mackenzie, also 52, the boatman; and 22-year-old bachelor John MacDonald. A relief fund was set up for the bereaved, and immediately money began to pour in. On 12th April, the first body was found, washed ashore between Och and Fortrose on the Black Isle. It was Murdo MacLeod. A search was made all along the coastline following the discovery, but no more bodies were found until a fortnight later, when further men were discovered. On Friday 20th April, a body was seen floating off Shannonry Point. It was brought to shore and identified as John Mackenzie. Around the same time, the body of Richard State was found, around 1/4 of a mile from Kilmuir. William Hobbs was found on the Sunday near Och and was easily identified by his clothes. Following the discovery of John MacDonald's body, James Kilby's was the last to be found. It was badly decomposed when it was discovered on a beach at Campbelltown on 9th July. All the men were buried at Tomnahurich Cemetery. A memorial plaque was unveiled in 2017 to commemorate the disaster between the old ticket office and the former Coast Guard station, known as Tangle Tower. The Kessock Ferry disaster was immortalised by poet William McGonagall, although he mistakenly put the date as 2nd March. He did, after all, have the unenviable accolade of being known as Scotland's worst poet. The opening of the Kessock Bridge in 1982 consigned the Kessock Ferry as a vital link to history. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.